Okay, I think we are on the show, and let's get our little light bulb and typewriter and chronometers on the fly here today. Slightly earlier than usual on the 28th of July 2025. And as usual, tortuganwordpress.com. There's a whole bunch of freebie stuff there. Share and share alike. Um, Not as up to date as, of course, books, but nonetheless still full of useful little information. So we got the links in for last week's show that we did from Seattle. Got that all taken care of, so everybody can now follow up on that. And now here we are back in Spokane in the traditional den of doom as we proceed with the exciting book Titans. And we are into their next chapter. They start off with a whole slew of material that's playing off young Earth creationist claims about soft tissue survival, and Mary Schweitzer is being brought up. Cute, cute, cute. However, they make the terrible mistake of actually supplying a secondary data field source, which I think is manna from heaven. They have a maintained spreadsheet of 116 biomaterial fossil papers that Brian Thomas and Joel Tay, Tay being a co-author of this book, put up at docsgoogle.com. And it's still up, has not been updated since 2021. So basically they stopped adding to it after they got their book out. It just ground to a halt. But most importantly is to find out what isn't on it. And the Schweitzer paper from 2014, which I will be putting a link up to, on the part that iron plays in the natural preservation of these biomolecules, and their 2016 paper on biofilms, similarly playing a role in preservation. How curious is it that those are not on the list? 2014 and 2016 is way before 2021, which means that, hi, Lisa, which means that Thomas and Tay, I'm shocked to hear this, are deleting papers that don't fit their paradigm. They're only dribbling the source citations that will fit their argument and conveniently leaving out the parts that don't, so that their dear readers, if they decide to go to the spreadsheet, will find all these papers that are on there, but nothing that is outside of what they want to be true. Shock, shock, shock. What a surprise, what a surprise, what a surprise. This is also our little Luskin week. It's a kind of a truncated one because of all of the rush going back and forth from Seattle, although it's a doozy. Because there's a paper from 2020 by Hernandez in PNAS on B2 and ALU retrotransposons are self-cleaving ribozymes whose activity is enhanced by EZH2, which is, wow, razzle dazzle, but it means that this is a paper that is directly discussing ribozymes, and I will put that in the little conversation in here. Ribozymes. Let me make sure I'm getting my little spelling correct here. Ribozymes are self-cleaving RNA. They are self-replicating, catalytic, autocatalytic. They perform as a large measure. It's thought that they are playing a role in the early development of life before we get Luca, last universal common ancestor. So of all the possible things that Luskin and company might not have wanted to bring up, it's the ribozyme functionality of B2 and ALU, B2 being the mouse version of this retrotransposon, and ALU being the version of it that's popped up. The ALU one being like, what, 300 nucleotides long, something like that. The paper's concluding paragraph is highly relevant, and I'll be sticking that in the video description. hinging the epigenetic induction of stress-related genes to turnover of these short RNAs seems highly adaptive because no new synthesis of gene products would be required, and the critical element would instead be the recruitment of a protein factor, EZH2, that already exists inside cells and stands ready to be mobilized. With B2 and ALU being present in hundreds of thousands of copies in mammals and being especially active in early development and during stress, their catalysis would likely represent the predominant ribozyme activity in mouse and human cells. In other words, we got a thing that's already in place that latches on to either B2 or ALU that generates activity. Are they the circular little things in the cell? The core of the ribosome that plugs amino acids together is an RNA ribozyme. The ALU things are the ones that I mentioned before, are like weird little Lego blocks that they like to attach to themselves, so they can often cut off segments of DNA, which is the reason why we don't have tails, among other things. So good gravy. You have to wonder, to what extent did Luskin or whoever put the paper in there, because you have Luskin and I think Klinghoffer and McClatchy and a couple others are the ones that compiled this monster list of 800 plus papers. Did they bother reading past the abstract? Did they really bother looking at the actual content of the material, since the vast majority of these that we've been encountering are full access? Anything that the PNAS, for example, is open access after a year. Virtually all the stuff they've been putting in Genome and the various other journals involved have been open access. There's only one or two that I've encountered that are either too obscure of a journal that they don't have a full access or not. Means that they could have read the whole bloody thing. Did they bother doing that? You got to get past the abstract and get down to the discussion section and the meat of the thing, which is putting things into context. So this I find rather intriguing all the way around. And of course, 2 weeks from now, we'll have another little setup on things as we continue our foray into the exciting world of yawn. I really don't anticipate that there will be any papers on that list. It's all going to be churning around the follow-up work on already existing issues that we know that a small percentage of these retrotransposons and short repeat elements and the like, a few percentage points, even could be as high as 10 or 15%, maybe 20% even. But that's foam on the beer compared to the intelligent design and creationist anticipation that there would be no non-functional or flotsam DNA at all in the genome. And we'll find out whether or not they do more face-saving apologetics, another matter. One of the things that I was doing over on the coast while I was disconnected from my normal research here on the computer here was sorting out material for the next section of the Rocks for Their Cosmological chapter, which I know Jackson, my co-author, is just really anxious for me to get this bloody thing done so I can then move on to deal with Noah's Lost Worlds, which is the chapter that he's already constructed his material. It's going to have material on the whales and the Grand Canyon and geography and that of the real world versus the cartoon form that we're getting in the creationist context. But in the course of that, then I was sorting through material on solar system formation, generically, as well as our own solar system for the new book, and discovering, gee whiz, young Earth creationists have not done a hell of a lot on this topic. I was genuinely expecting there to be more forays into the field, although amongst the current astronomically inclined creationists, you don't have a hell of a lot of people to begin with. But I would have thought they would have been at it longer. You get some old stuff from like the Henry Morse era where they're just kind of thumbing their nose at the nebular hypothesis and providing zero sources for it. You get, and then a dribble of material over the last 10 or 15 years from Jonathan Sarfati and Hartnett and Faulkner, where they're sort of skirting around the edges of the science literature. There was a thing that I popped up with, these Wolf-Rayet stars that turn out to have relevance to the phenomenon that is going on in the things leading up to the formation of our solar system, as well as stellar flybys and a whole bunch of fun stuff. And the amount of technical literature is really amazingly neat. And it's not being noticed in the creationist community, because even these earlier posts from those authors are generic. They're just skirting past. They're citing themselves a lot. Hartnett in particular just basically cites himself, whereas Sarfati and Faulkner kind of skirt around the edges on stuff. He did a chapter in the Answers Book 4 that has 0 sources in it, and so relatively little in the way of specificity. So it'll, I think, be a really spectacular contrast. What turned out to be in my big stack of material, the vast majority of it turned to be out to be on a different subject altogether, which is going to be alluded to later in the chapter, which is their obsession with magnetic fields. Russell Humphreys has gone berserk over the years, denying that the Earth has a geomagnetic dynamo that's caused naturally, making predictions that are iffy about magnetic fields on the various planets. And this stuff is churned around the creationist literature far more so than anything relating to the formation of solar systems. But the closest we get on the bit is a thing from, I think, Hartnett, who bumps into an older paper, or rather an older summary of issues that was in Nature magazine that was actually referring to a technical paper, which Hartnett conveniently does not cite, and that relates to supposedly these people had proven that the models that are being used cannot account for the formation of the asteroid belt and the inner planets, and therefore, ta-da, that means creationism. Well, what this stuff actually was referring to was the process whereby it was beginning to dawn in the period 2015, 2016 on, that in order to account for things like why there are the inner planets where they are and why the asteroid belt is where it is that there's been some planetary movements early in the history of our planetary solar system formation, particular Jupiter forming early, and it started moving inboard, and then Saturn forms, and Mercury was knocked into the inner solar system because it was actually formed farther out, and all this stuff. So there's been a veritable revolution in the last 10 years on the dynamics of the solar system that, again, is not a topic that's getting covered a lot in the creationist literature. Citing yourself means serious scholarship. Oh, yeah, well, the CMI crowd, I think, are kind of super addicted to it. Where, as I pointed out regarding Sarfati and Tay, how incredibly narrow. They don't really veer too much beyond CMI, Creation Ministries International. So they're not, even though there is a technical literature out there on the creationist side from Answers in Genesis, Answers Research Journal, Journal of Creation, all that stuff, unless it's something available at CMI, they're not wanting to deal with it. And then, of course, ICR is off in Cloud Cuckoo land with their little specialized crowd that are becoming increasingly marginalized, frankly, in the creationist community. So it's an interesting set of turf wars that are going on as to who gets cited and who not, and who dumps on who and who not. Danny Faulkner is really the surprise here, because boy, has he moved the goalposts for creationists. It hasn't actually translated into anything substantive, really, in working out viable creationist models for distant starlight and all that stuff. But at the very least, he's recognizing the nature of how many of the earlier models, including Russell Humphreys, just don't work. And another little quirky one, I had to decide whether or not I wanted to add it to the chart that I was doing. We're going to have a chart in the book about the handful, as in four, non-young Earth creationists who have tried to put actual sequence to the Genesis days and relate them to the actual events that have happened over time. And they have, some of them decide to go all the way back to the Big Bang for their calibration. Others, I think, reasons to believe goes with the formation of the solar system. So they just leave out the first 9 billion years. And they're snagging on when birds are appearing and when whales are appearing and plants. And what does it mean for the stars and the sun and the moon to become visible on day 4? And they can't agree on what numbers they're applying it. Well, in the research that I was doing while I was over in Seattle, I uncovered an outlier, a Mormon apologist from 2011 that I almost thought of adding another column to this chart. But the irony was that it's so screwball a resolution to the issue that, I just allude to it in the text. Because this Mormon decides to just have the days of creation varying length and potentially overlapping. So instead of there being day 1, which becomes day 2, which becomes day 3 in a nice discrete pattern, the way Reasons to Believe and Kenneth Poppy and Gerald Schroeder did, and Robert Newman, although he didn't supply dates to it, he was a little bit coy. They just have these things telescoping back and forth. So day 4 is taking place earlier than big chunks of day 3. Well, if you go that approach, the days don't mean a damn thing. They're absolutely useless as a guide for that. And so it's maybe not a surprise that a Mormon would be the one who would come up with such a harebrained solution to an intractable problem. It's very, very amusing. So that's going to be an interesting little feature to come up on after the solar system material gets out of the way. Then we move on to the moon. And meteors and comets and the little fiddly bits about the outer planets and all that kind of stuff. There's an ongoing drumbeat of repetition going on. You see it at Acts and Facts with a small number of writers that just repeat the same mantras over and over again regarding the planets. They've had a whole series on the various planets where they're saying, oh, what wonderful harbingers of creation, and here's some creationist sources, and maybe you might get within a mile of a secular source, but they're very, very cagey about it. Little different dynamic that goes on with CMI and AIG, so we'll get all that sorted out. And then there'll be the dangling loose ends of the Hovin theory, stuff on one of my favorites, which is the lunar dust myth, which has kind of faded away. It was a really popular thing 40, 50 years ago that Henry Morris and company were playing around with, but eventually got to the point where most creationists have said, no, which is the issue that there was concern that there would be a ton of meteoric dust accumulating on the moon based on early estimates of how much meteoric dust was accumulating on the Earth, and they were extrapolating out for what would be on the moon if everything was billions of years old. Well, the numbers were screwball. They were making bad assumptions. They were they were overestimating how much meteoric dust was accumulating, and therefore some people, not many, were coming up with just hellacious, like 20-foot of dust and all that. Ernest Gold, I think, was one. Thomas Gold, whatever his first name was, it's escaped me at the moment. He was one of those who was really expecting there to be the poor little lunar lander to just disappear into a mass of dust, which turned out no. And they've now been able to, of course, physically measure the meteoric dust rate in space, so they have a much better definitions on all this stuff. So it's come to the point where the factual data is just so easily accessible that the creationists have just had to give up on this one. And therefore, if anybody mentions it, it means they're riffing off of really old apologetics, and they don't know how to fact check even by going to Answers in Genesis. So all of that stuff is sorting out all the little mess and folderol that we want to get into and get all that out of the way. I've got most of my heavy gun material complete, all the stuff on the anthropic fine-tuning argument, which I think is going to be a real neat one. because I was genuinely surprised as to how bad the fine-tuning argument was. That when you really started diving down into the background technical literature, it turns out, no. These things are not at all. You know what they say about assuming. Yes. Well, there are an awful lot of asses knocking around in the creationist community on this stuff. But what you find, I highly recommend paying attention to lots of different creationist subcultures, because it allows you to navigate and find out who's copying from whom and what old material is getting recycled, who they rely on and why, which you can't get if you're just looking tunnel vision. So there are some who just have like the eye on the ICR and they're only paying attention to just that. And I can understand if time is a concern, you know, my gosh, can you pay attention to everything? But there is an interesting dynamic of seeing things as to what's going on at AIG versus what's going on at CMI versus what's going on at Reasons to Believe versus what's going on at ICR versus what's going on in Kent Hovind land, where, or for that matter, Eric Hovind, who is sucking off of an awful lot of the CMI AIG apologetics, although he still has blips of material that he's just copied from Daddy. So there's this cross churning that goes on in that respect. And then you have little outliers, the people that you find on the internet who listen to something that maybe somebody in their church said or whatever, and they may or may not supply a source for it. And some of this stuff disappears from the internet. So I'd say maybe a quarter of the printout material that I have on particularly older material on creationists on a variety of topics, their websites are gone. They've URL is non-existent. They've just never kept up with it. And so there too are little bliplets of who relies on what and all the rest. So we'll be allowing a lot of people to sort through all the mess because of everything being cross-referenced so that people can see the trail of breadcrumbs and find what ideas peak at a certain point and then tail off, which ones persist all the way down. The comet claim that comets can't be really old. They can't go back to the earliest of the universe or the early part of the solar system. Like anyone's saying that would be the case. It'll be interesting to see whether or not within my lifetime we get, as new probes are being set up, they're starting to make probes, although whether the Trump administration ends up financing some of these things, we'll find out. But there are other things, European Space Agency and others, that are trying to get out to be able to really study that bloody Oort cloud, which is very far out and very faint, composed of little itty-bitty things, that you can see the implications of it as certain very long period comets are such that if you extrapolate backwards, it sure looks like they're coming from where the Oort cloud would be. Other things are coming in from the inner Kuiper belt, where we're actually starting to have telescopic imagery of that from Hubble and James Webb and all that kind of stuff. But the Oort cloud is still one of those little question mark areas for pinning things down. And so creationists have run with it and have a field day with it because they can still have a fog bank of uncertainty about it. So many of the other claims that they've been making over the years, the neutrino, missing neutrinos, the missing supernovas, there's a whole string of things that have just gone by the wayside and were popular enough in the apologetics of contemporary creationists that they have to go out of their way to put a please don't use this anymore. They don't want to get rid of the post, but they have to modify it to say, yeah, you really shouldn't use this one. Don't think anyone says comets go back to the beginning. Exactly. That's precisely the flaw in the argument. In the same way as they'll say that Saturn's rings aren't like billions of years old. Who says they are? It's extremely likely that if we were to look at Saturn a couple billion years ago, it might not have had any rings at all, and that they come and go. Saturn is particularly interesting in having a spectacular array of them, and they could last for millions of years before they dissipate. Well, yeah, the same way as it's highly likely that if you could time travel back 100 million years and took a telescopic view of Jupiter, the red spot wouldn't be there, although there might be a different hurricane going on in that. We apparently had a little itty bitty ringlet, likely during the Ordovician, from a captured satellite that got ripped apart in our Roche limit, and eventually they started dropping down onto the Earth as a selective set of craters along the equator. And probably along the way, there would have been a little ringlet of the smaller debris that would have been around the Earth. Probably as faint as like the one, I can't remember which Uranus or Neptune's ring is really, really faint. And it was only really discovered when we sent like the Voyager probes out there where they go, oh my gosh. And for that matter, I think there's a little bit of a faint ring around Jupiter in that as well. Not the beginning, but the Oort cloud is assumed to be made of the dust and gas that form the solar system. Yeah, it's basically the freeze-dried outer ring of things. Because when you're that far out from the active Big Bernie thing that is our sun, what is it to do? It's cold. Nothing's interfering with it. They just sit there. And that's another reason why a lot of cosmologists like to get samples of asteroids and some of these little deep things from the Kuiper Belt, precisely because they're basically pristine crap that's been sitting there doing nothing for a very long time. It hasn't been modified in any way. It's not churning up on plate tectonics or any of this other stuff. So it gives us lots and lots of clues. One of the things that helps date the age of the solar system are when we get a meteorite and we can find out how old the bloody thing is. Wow, that's really old. They show up older than the vast majority of rocks on the planet. Why? Because the rocks get constantly recycled, whereas the meteor was just sitting out there from the early formation of the solar system. And of course, you'll think having an unusually large moon to collect the smaller asteroid could have been a factor in life being able to evolve on the Earth. To some extent, no less a non-creationist than Isaac Asimov, way long time ago, did a thing, and I can't remember if it was in the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction or some other venue, but I remember reading it a long time ago, where he was pointing out how our moon is really unique in helping to stabilize the wobble of the axis so it doesn't wobble all over the place. The tidal factors have an effect on things on the planet. So it had quite a lot to do with the dynamics of the thing. The debris stuff, the moon is not the major player here. It's Jupiter. And that's what's been the big dynamic, that the reason why there's the asteroid belt where it is and the reason why the planets are kind of located where they are is stupendously due to the fact that not all that typically we have a really big Jupiter-sized planet. You can have some that are even bigger than super Jupiters. They're also quite rare. If you look at, all you have to do is to look as a little map of the size of the planets to realize that you have Jupiter and then Saturn much smaller, and then Uranus and Neptune are smaller yet. And the current modeling, which we will be going into in the new book, is that Jupiter is forming early. And if it hadn't been for bloody Saturn, Jupiter would have just been mawing its way closer and closer to the sun and devouring everything in between, sucking it in as moonlets and incorporating it into itself, which is why a lot of these ginormous super Jupiters are orbiting their stars very close. Well, what happened was, as Jupiter is doing this maneuver trick, Saturn is forming behind, and its gravitational pull starts tugging on Jupiter and slowing it down to where more crap can go on in the inner solar system. And Mercury, which apparently was formed much farther out than it is now, got knocked into its present orbit. All of this is taking place like in the first few 100 million years or so of the solar system, at the point where a heavy bombardment is still going on the Earth, and things are forming, and then you have the Theia impact that splats our moon out. It was a busy time. The extent to which we can see similarly busy things going on in protostar systems and early planetary system formations with the new JWST is reinforcing all of that. So early chaos kind of settling down as the mix figures into place. If not, in fact, a cosmological historian. Yeah. Space rocks taste better than moon rocks because they are a little meteor. Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's fair to say that there's a whole bunch of benchmarks as an old fart, gray hair, old fart, is that so many disciplines within my lifetime have transformed spectacularly to where if you aren't paying attention to the recent material and your brain has congealed in an earlier time frame where you're stuck with what you got in your college textbooks or whatever, depending on when that, or worse, high school textbooks, that you're really behind the curve. So you've got the transformation with probably the first, obviously the quantum theory and relativity theory was going on way before I came along the scene. And that shook everybody up. But the geology was kind of thinking they had a lot settled and kind of looked askance in the 20s and 30s and 40s on about the idea of continental drift because Wegener, of course, couldn't come up with a good mechanism for it. So there was a ginormous revolution in the 60s and 70s when they really discovered that, although there was a woman geologist, and I can never remember her name. It was like Fleming or something like that. It was a very simple name. She worked at a geology college, I think at college level. But she was one of the first to notice the Mid-Atlantic Ridge stuff that was coming in the 1920s and thought, wow, that could have something to do with that Wegener thing. But because woman, what the hell can you know? Pretty little lady. So they really didn't pay attention to that. But it's discussed in Neil Shubin's book on I think multiple rocks or something. I can't remember what the title of the book was. Done maybe 2016, something like that. It was a very interesting book. Remember what dinosaurs looked like in the early 1970s. Not so much about cosmology. Yeah. And of course, dinosaurs also went through a spectacular change. That really was in the late 70s and 80s on. The movement to more active, more warm-blooded format dinosaurs. And plus, starting in the 1990s, you really started to get more paleontology on finding more of the birds that were living during the Mesozoic, of which the vast majority of them are not the group that modern birds are from. So you and now you even have, like Gigi or whatever the thing is that's part feathers, part like batwing bird. So there's probably 3 or 4, maybe even more lineages of bird flyers coming out of the theropod dinosaurs, of which the biggest group, the enantiornithines, were the dominant group until the mass extinction, and then only the ornithines made it through unscathed, and from which all extant birds have derived. Yes, dwarfs are planets too. Yes, indeed. It's one of the things about the bit about Pluto being demoted. It doesn't change anything about it. It's still exactly the same object that it was beforehand. But the reason why there needed to be a change in the nomenclature is that now they found so many other little planetismals of about the Pluto size that even have other things revolving around them, that if Pluto's a planet, we don't have 9 planets. We've got hundreds. And so maybe we need to have a different category. So we're stuck with the 8 really big clunker planets, and then the Pluto-sized stuff, and then little smaller debris going out into the dingleberries. So all of that stuff really has been coming on. Hubble telescope only started coming in the 1990s. At the same time, so think about how revolutionary the 1990s were, because you're getting the discovery of all of these birds, and the paleontological record is expanding. The whale evolution is starting to come into focus during that same period. You've also got the discovery of homeobox genes that had been burbling up in the 80s and 90s, but by the 90s on really was kicking into high gear, totally transforming how we look at things and regulatory systems, and the fact that the underlying homeobox structure of all the animal phyla are basically the same, with little mutations and duplications and variations. And that's why cockroaches look so different from emus. But it's not because they have a fundamentally different internal deep structure. Whereas when I was growing up, genetics was kind of thinking that the genomic structure of arthropods would be really different than vertebrates, but that turned out not to be the case. So you got that. In another area that's been an absolute spectacular revolution, we're still feeling our way around in it. It relates to cognitive architecture, working out what's going on in the brain, what genes are involved, what synapse systems, what brain centers are involved in various things. And I can tell you as well that the vast majority of anti-evolutionists and religious apologists who prattle on about the soul and the like have no interest in looking into any of that literature. It's just like invisible, worse even than the reptile mammal transition. Does this mean the area of outer solar system is expanded? Oh, absolutely. And there's also been just as within my lifetime, when they began to realize that the solar atmosphere kind of dissipates out, but is much bigger than the big ball of fire that we can see, and the magnetic heliopauses and all these things that are off around planets that have magnetic fields, and so there's all these interactions with all of this stuff. It's been just spectacular. Yes, roaches will survive the apocalypse. Yes, and some of the roaches may end up as cabinet officials in the Trump administration. I wouldn't put it past them, and they would probably do a better job than Kash Patel and Lutnick or Nutlick, as some wags have inverted the name. Anyway, we digress. So the spectacular array of technical literature that has come along and revolutions in how we look at stuff in terms of geological modeling and being able to do retro engineering of both molecules and evolutionary sequences is just becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. And creationists are not paying attention to much of this stuff. So by keeping up with the current technical literature, unfortunately, as I've mentioned on other episodes, we've got a really neat network of people in the bunch that I'm associated with, Dan Stern Cardinale and Erica Gutsick-Gibbon and Dapper Dino and all these people that have their own specialties, Zach Hancock and all the rest, that my brain would explode if I had to keep track of as many journals as there are out there. Fortunately, they pay attention to an awful lot of stuff for us. And so they will be bringing up their current material, just like Dan Stern Cardinale and Erica. While I was over in Seattle, I got to catch their show where they were diving into detail about this 2016 Baum paper that a bunch of particularly the intelligent design crowd have been blatantly misrepresenting the content on. So Dan was diving in. He said he had to kind of flex his own mental muscles as well, because a lot of this stuff involves the little nuts and bolts of how you really analyze cladistic parsimonious data fields. So some of the stuff is papers from like 1991 and all of that that's laying out the ground rules about how all of that stuff works. And it was a really delightful explanatory bit. Yeah, well, I'll give you this. Let me take a little bit of issue on it. Is that you still find people, and they are invariably young Earth creationists, who will do the dinosaurs aren't real, paleontology is just faked up. They've always been around. But they've never been part of the kind of air quotes mainstream creationist thing. So the ones that you would be encountering in there are at frankly below Kent Hovind level apologetics. This kind of argument you wouldn't have seen in Henry Morris or Dwayne Gish. You wouldn't have seen it at the crowd circulating around Ken Ham when he was forming Answers in Genesis, or the ones that have fissioned off into CMI. But you do find way down below bottom feeder level, those sorts of attitudes still pop up. But they're not part of the mainstream creationist community. Now, there's more than enough dumb at their level that they're getting things wrong. But that's the one thing that I would say, that none of the major creationists ever were arguing that the fossils weren't real or the dinosaurs weren't real. And you have to really climb down like Candace Owen level and below to locate somebody today who will be blathering on about that. And they have obviously not got this from reading Answers in Genesis. They're just running off of the scuttlebutt thing. You get a little bit of this material in kind of the nooks and crannies of people in the Adventist movement. There's a whole bunch of little sidebar things, just like there's kind of an undercurrent in Mormonism that's a young earth creationist block out of that. So that's why it's important to keep track of all the different players on here, because it's a broad field. Hardship is someone less scientifically informed than Ken Ham. It doesn't. I have no problem envisaging people that are less scientifically informed than Ken Ham. Ken Ham, though, is an exemplar in that he doesn't even pay attention to his own side. He's made claims. I was just found it hilarious. Just a few years ago, he was going on about the horse sequence and how it's mythical. And I'm going, what, didn't you see what they have at the Ark encounter? Haven't you spotted the proto horse that they have as the created kind aboard the Ark? Doesn't he get around? So I'm entirely, it would have been really fun. I know, Bill Nye the Science Guy, he went on a tour of the Ark encounter after it opened with Ken Ham. But Bill Nye's not a paleontologist and the like. And what I sort of performed this fun role, and it's available online. The late Cy Strike and a friend of his went to the Ark encounter, and they recorded piles of stuff. And then afterwards, I provided color commentary. And what really interested me about it was they have a sampling of critters in their little cages with the little descriptions of what they are and a small amount of information about them. And that proved to be some of the most interesting areas for where they were clearly moving the goalposts. The short-necked giraffes and the Dinohippus horse and all of that stuff. And for that matter, even Pakicetus, like whales, are coming out after the Ark. Are we clear about that? They're very, very iffy about that stuff. Yeah, Kent Hovind, that'll do. Yeah. Kent Hovind is, well, I'll give, I think Kent Hovind and Ken Ham probably share an awful lot of the same dumb ideas. The difference is that Ken Ham has now reached the point where he's sort of pontificating on the sideline, whereas Kent Hovind is blither-blathering the same blither-blather weekly, daily, however many shows he does, in a way that Ham doesn't. He sort of wafts in like God Almighty on their little video show and stuff that he does. And then he has assistants that craft up. If you look at the bottoms of a lot of the Ken Ham blogs, it says with the assistance of staff, so he's not necessarily writing all of this himself in the same way that Donald Trump tweets aren't necessarily tippy-typed by Trump himself, but he dictates them, and some little hapless drone is the one that actually types and makes sure the caps lock is on. Yes, that's the one I'm referring to. Yeah, I think it's like 11, 12, however many. If you Google the Pimp Out the Ark or something like that, that's one of the episode titles that you can locate on it. And I was delighted. The reason why I'm doing videos today is because Cy Strike encountered me in various contexts, and he practically browbeated me to saying, you have got to start doing videos. You have got to do these things. So he came up with the title Evolution Hour and all of that. And if you look at the really early Evolution Hours I was doing before Peter came up with his razzle dazzle opening, that was material that was generated by Cy Strike. So bless him. And volume 1 of Rocks Were There is dedicated to Cy Strike. And the volume 2 is Jim Ludlow, who died quite tragically. I mean, he was doing anti-creationist videos in just terrible pain because he was terrible cancer and stuff, and was going right up to the tail end of it. He also was very good at debating Kent Hovind because he studied what Hovind blathered. So he knew exactly what Hovind was going to say. Nobody who ever has debated Kent Hovind who knows Hovind's patter should be surprised by anything he says, because he repeats the same craft over and over again. Jeff is the only reason I know a lot of people. Yeah, it's an amazing group of interactive folks that we have. And I think that's one of the bright sides of the wacky media world that we have currently is that it is possible for so many fabulously interesting people to be interacting with each other on a direct basis. It's also possible for people with their heads up their ass. It's funny, Kent Hovind tried to do a YouTube video. Oh, both of those have way too big egos to ever tolerate. Kent Hovind is the Donald Trump of creationism. He is just a malignant, narcissistic jerk. And I don't think he could ever share the stage with anybody. I think I had a thing I wanted to highlight up here as well. Somebody brought up Candace Owens. Yeah, Candace Owens being sued for promoting hate speech. That wouldn't surprise me at all. She is that anti-trans material pervades that culture camp subculture. The co-author of the Privileged Planet, Jay Richards, is doing anti-trans work at the Heritage Foundation currently. He was bragging about it when they were talking about the with Frank Turek on the 20th anniversary edition of Privileged Planet. We'll be citing that in our discussion of fine-tuning stuff in Rocks 2. Well, my gosh, we are 45 minutes in. I forgot to thank our dear patrons for assisting. We still have not figured out how to resolve the weird color balance problem that the Windows. See, I'm just running off the freebie version of Word on my laptop here because I'm not made of money, so we don't deal that. So the active one that I'm using to write stuff is on my old PC. Anyway, everybody, colleagues, researchers, assistant researchers, friends, and all that, all the different people that can support over the years, and Ian Chen and Stephen Early and Paula Gia and all of these people and the various ones over the years that have come and gone because finances shift and few have passed on. Lavender Lady and others have had their sad day in the sun, and we miss them all. So all of that is all part of the little support network that I'm very much appreciative of, and I will keep doing this as I can. Yeah, it would be really hilarious to kind of see some of these people do stuff. The thing that I would be intrigued in is to watch the waffliness of intelligent design. Michael Behe, for example, has been on the same stage as young Earth creationists, but he does not discuss, he doesn't criticize young Earth creationism. He just presents the intelligent design pattern. Same thing, as far as I can tell, with Stephen Meyer. So they are not trying to actively challenge the false mythology, even though they don't believe it themselves, and in private will offer the reasons why they don't believe it. They're just not willing to blow up their potential relationships with the young Earth creationist crowd, which I think is one of the craven things about the current intelligent design movement, and is rendering it increasingly peripheral in the field. The Answers in Genesis block is really still the big kid on the block on this stuff. I'm trying to get my little... There we go. Find out what last time we lost 3 people. Yeah. All of this... we're going to keep at it. And of course, the next few years are going to be really, really dicey busy. If you see some of the latest videos about some of the nasty totalitarian swooping people off the streets from ICE, it's just shameful and pathetic. The idea that a law enforcement arm would not want to be visibly seen, they would not want to show their identification, they would not want to have like a warrant, they would not be explaining to people why they're being detained. It's very, very creepy. And we're going to be facing an awful serious issue for our credibility as a nation of laws rather than a nation of power-hungry pricks. Well, on that little happy note, let me put up my advert for Rocks for There. Blumpity blimp, blumpity blimp, blumpity blump. Wait for my little... Come on, there we go. And I have to get my thing running and then switch over to share screen. We are an old, tired person here. At least although it's going to be hot here in Spokane. We're not as bad as places in the east, and the idea of being 100 degrees and humidity, whoa. Well, at least we don't have to worry about that here. And just a click away. Just the weather report here in Spokane had a big smoke alert going on over in Montana, where smoke from fires south of Montana and farther east apparently are going on to the point where they've got weather alerts and breathing alerts and all that stuff. And we're kind of on the edge of the lighter part of this big layer that's popping over into the panhandle of Idaho. So isn't the climate interesting? And can we imagine nitwit Trump going over to Scotland to golf and still complaining about the damned wind turbines out there? He's announced there aren't going to be building wind turbines here in America. Sorry, that cat's out of the bag. What's he going to tell all the wind turbines that they put up in Texas? They have to tear them down so that when they have their next power failure, they can huddle in the dark and say, but at least we're not getting electricity from a wind turbine. Yeah, we'll see how that goes. So it's going to be an interesting time ahead, and it could be dangerous for far too many people, but there's also the opportunity for people at the grassroots to organize and prepare for the 26 midterms to make sure that what gerrymandering they try to do is insufficient to be able to compensate for the bigger field. And we'll see what impact there is. If my estimation that we're going to have a really big, serious economic downturn as a result of all these idiot policies, what impact that's going to be having on the popularity of Trump 2.0. We will be seeing. So anyway, everybody stay safe, stay cool, avoid getting snatched off the street by ICE, keep curious. Good gravy, we live in a fabulous era when nobody has an excuse for being as ignorant as some people are. Funny part is Scotland gets 40% of its power from wind. Oh, yeah, major fields in there. And I've always found the wind turbines extremely beautiful, and I'm fond of the things. A monstrous wind farm in Kansas when I was driving through there on a trip with my niece some way back. But anyway, I digress again. So everybody, stay safe, and we will be seeing you kids all next week. And I did put the links in for last week's show. That's all taken care of. I did that just before I went on the air here. So